I never thought I would be the kind of man who ended up at a place like this. The room was dimly lit, a circle of worn-out chairs arranged in the center. The air smelled of stale coffee and a hint of old wood polish. Men sat slouched in their seats, some staring at the floor, others looking at me with silent understanding. They knew why I was here. They had been in my shoes. I stood at the front, my fingers gripping the podium tighter than necessary. My heart pounded as I swallowed down the fear threatening to choke me. "Hello, my name is Ethan." A murmur of greetings, a few nods. I exhaled slowly and forced myself to continue. I never thought my marriage was anything less than perfect. Lauren and I met in college, one of those love-at-first-sight kind of stories. She was everything I could have wanted, smart, kind, beautiful in a way that turned heads, but never let it get to her. We got married 5 years ago, bought a house, built a life. I paused, memories of lazy Sunday mornings in bed with her flashing through my mind. The way she used to run her fingers over my jaw, teasing me about the stubble. The way she smelled, lavender and something sweet, something purely Lauren. I clenched my jaw, pushing the thoughts away. That woman didn't exist anymore. I worked hard, maybe too hard. Long hours at the firm, coming home late, always telling myself I was doing it for us. And Lauren, well, she started to change. At first, I thought it was nothing, just a shift in routine, stress from work. She'd be distant one moment and overly affectionate the next. The sex was different, more intense, desperate even. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my next words pressing down on my chest. Then I found out why. Silence. Some of the men shifted in their seats, leaning in. They already knew what was coming, but they waited for me to say it. My wife was having an affair. My voice was steady, colder than I expected. Not just an affair. A full-blown, humiliating, manipulative betrayal. My knuckles turned white around the edge of the podium. She was fucking her boss, Richard, and their secretary, Vanessa. A few men exhaled sharply. One let out a quiet curse. It wasn't just sex, I continued, my voice sharp. It was more than that. It was the sneaking around, the gaslighting, the lies right to my face. They laughed about it, joked about how I was too oblivious to see it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I have proof. Audio recordings. Messages. Videos. More murmurs, but I wasn't finished. I didn't confront her. Not at first. What would have been the point? She had already made a fool of me. Instead, I set a plan in motion. A plan that would change everything. A plan that would make sure they all paid. I should have seen the signs earlier. Looking back, it was all there. The late nights at the office that didn't add up. The sudden surge of gym sessions when she had never cared much for fitness before. The way her phone was always face down on the table. But I was blind. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it. Lauren was a lawyer. Sharp, calculating, always 5 steps ahead. And she used that against me. She started acting off. At times, she'd pull away from me, lost in thought, like I was just some presence in her life rather than the man she'd sworn vows to. Other times, she'd be all over me, kissing me hungrily, dragging me into bed the moment I walked through the door, like she was trying to erase something, like she was trying to cover up what she had already done. Then there was the lingerie. I remember coming home one night to find a new set of lace panties in the laundry basket, black, delicate, something I had never seen her wear for me. And then another set a week later. I asked her about them once, jokingly, but she just laughed it off, saying, "A girl's allowed to treat herself, isn't she?" I let it go, like a fool. But the moment that truly shattered my illusion came on a random Thursday night. Lauren was in our bedroom, lying on her side with her back to me, her phone pressed to her ear. I had just gotten home, moving quietly down the hallway when I heard her voice, low, hushed, playful. I should have walked in right then and there. Instead, I stopped, listened. "Relax, Vanessa," she whispered, and then a soft laugh. I know, but Richard is insatiable, and he doesn't like to share." A pause. I could hear the faint sound of a woman laughing on the other end of the call. "I told you," Lauren purred. "If I'm pregnant, there's a good chance it's his. I mean, Ethan and I have sex, sure, but it's different." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The world around me seemed to slow as her words echoed in my skull. "If I'm pregnant, There's a good chance it's his. I backed away, my breath caught in my throat. My hands were shaking, my heart slamming against my ribs. I knew then that this wasn't just some meaningless affair. She had fucked Richard. Over and over again. Not just him, but Vanessa too. The three of them. Like I was some joke in their private little game. And now she wasn't even sure if I was the father of our child. I didn't remember walking out of the house. I just remember suddenly finding myself in my car, my fingers locked around the steering wheel, gripping it so tightly I thought it would snap. I could have confronted her. I could have stormed back inside and screamed at her, demanded answers. But something dark settled in my chest that night. Something deeper than anger. A cold, burning clarity. I wasn't going to be a fool screaming at his cheating wife. I was going to make them pay. The next day, I did what any good accountant does best. I gathered evidence. Lauren thought she was clever. She covered her tracks well, deleting messages, using encrypted chats, keeping things discreet. But no one is that careful all the time. That morning, I installed recording software on the home Wi-Fi. Every device connected to our network, I had access to it. It wasn't illegal. I paid for the damn internet, after all. Within hours, I had more than I could stomach. Texts, voice notes, emails. Lauren and Vanessa giggling about their business trips. Richard boasting about how he had both of them wrapped around his finger. Photos, videos, and then there was the message. The one that sealed their fate. Vanessa, I swear, if Ethan ever finds out, he'll probably just cry like a little bitch. He's too soft to do anything about it. Lauren, I know, right? God, I feel bad sometimes, but then Richard bends me over his desk, and I forget all about my boring little husband. LOL. I stared at the screen, my entire body trembling. Soft? A little bitch? Boring? That was the moment I knew I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I wasn't going to be the weak husband she thought I was. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to destroy her. And I wasn't going to do it alone. There's a moment after betrayal where the pain hardens into something else. Something colder. I spent that entire night watching, listening, gathering evidence. Every text, every voice note, every disgusting little message between Lauren, Richard, and Vanessa. They weren't just careless. They were cocky. They believed they were untouchable. I planned to prove them wrong. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. So I reached out to the two people who had just as much reason to want revenge as I did, Beth and Tony. Beth was Richard's wife. She was a corporate strategist, a woman who built entire businesses from the ground up. Cold, sharp, and brilliant. Richard had married her for her mind as much as her money. I knew that if anyone could obliterate a cheating spouse, it was her. Tony was Vanessa's husband. A former Marine turned contractor, built like a goddamn bulldozer. The kind of man who didn't say much, but when he did, it carried weight. I had only met him a handful of times, but I knew one thing. He adored Vanessa. Or at least he had. By the time I texted them both, it was past 2 a.m. I didn't expect an immediate response. Beth answered within 2 minutes. Beth, what do you mean, proof? I sent her a single screenshot. One of Richard's messages to Lauren. Richard. Beth would never suspect a thing. She's too busy running her empire. Besides, even if she did find out, what's she gonna do? Divorce me? LMAO. Like she'd ever risk losing her perfect reputation. I waited. A minute passed. Then another. Then Beth replied. Beth, where can we meet? I smiled. Tony, on the other hand, took a little longer. But when he did reply, it was short. Tony, tell me when and where. By noon the next day, the three of us were sitting at a corner booth in a quiet diner. Cups of untouched coffee in front of us. Beth was dressed in her usual power suit, but her eyes were murderous. Tony sat stiffly across from me, his hands clenched into fists. I slid my phone across the table. Everything you need to see is in there. Beth picked it up first. As she scrolled, I watched her face, controlled, unreadable. But then I saw it, the flicker of something dark in her eyes. Then she handed it to Tony. He stared at the messages for a long time. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared. Then, without a word, he set the phone down and pushed it away like it disgusted him. Beth was the first to speak. They think we're weak. Her voice was icy, but there was something else underneath. Something dangerous. They think they could just do this and we'll sit back and take it. They don't just think it. I muttered. They've laughed about it. They joked about how we'd never have the balls to do anything. Tony exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. What's your plan, Ethan? I leaned forward, my voice low. We don't react right away. We let them go on their business trip. We let them think they've gotten away with it. And while they're out fucking each other, we tear their lives apart. Beth's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Tell me what you need. I looked at Tony. Are you in? His knuckles were white against the table. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but deadly. I want to watch them burn. Step 1. Financial ruin. Beth was a genius with numbers. Within 2 days, she had locked down Richard's personal accounts. She went through everything. Their mortgage, their investments, their shared business ventures. By the time she was done, she had moved every single liquid asset into her personal holdings. Richard wouldn't even know he was broke until he tried to use his credit card. And the best part? He couldn't even fight it. The house was in her name. The business investments were in her name. Even their vacation home was in her name. All Richard had left was his job, which we were about to obliterate. Step 2. Career suicide. Richard prided himself on being untouchable at his firm. A top partner, beloved by the board, respected in his industry. Beth knew different. Beth had dirt. Years' worth of shady financial dealings, questionable business expenses, borderline harassment claims that had been buried before they could go public. She sent everything to the board, to the firm's biggest clients, and to every major business publication in the city. Richard wouldn't just lose his job. He'd lose his entire career. Step 3. Destroying the home. While Beth and I worked on the financial and career side, Tony got personal. While Vanessa was away on her business trip, Tony emptied their house. He didn't just take his things, he took everything. Furniture? Gone. TV? Gone. Appliances? Uninstalled. He left Vanessa with nothing but a shell of a home. And, just for good measure, he sold their house. Yeah, sold it. To his cousin. For cash. By the time Vanessa came home, she wouldn't even have a place to live. Step 4. The sports car mystery. Richard loved his Corvette. Loved it. It was his baby, his pride and joy. He spent more time on that car than he ever did with his wife. So imagine his surprise when he came home to find it. Completely dismantled. Every piece neatly laid out in his driveway. The engine removed, the doors taken off, the tires missing. And the best part? No one could prove who did it. By the time the police got involved, there wasn't a single fingerprint. All Richard knew was that someone had completely and methodically taken apart his most prized possession. By the time we were done, Richard and Vanessa's lives were in ruins. And Lauren? Lauren had no idea what was waiting for her. I sat back in my chair, watching the pieces move into place. By the time she and Richard got back from their little getaway, they wouldn't just be caught. They would be shattered. And I would be right there to watch it happen. Lauren's flight was scheduled to land Friday afternoon. That gave me 3 days. 3 days to erase every trace of the home we had built together. While she was off screwing her boss and their secretary in some luxury hotel, I was at home, systematically taking everything apart. I didn't go in blind. I had a plan. Every appliance? Removed. Every light fixture? Uninstalled. Every outlet and switch plate? Gone. Every piece of furniture? Taken apart. But I didn't just destroy the house. No, I dismantled it. Carefully. Methodically. Lauren had always accused me of being too meticulous. Too precise. She used to roll her eyes when I spent weekends fixing things around the house, calling me boring. Well, that boring precision, it was about to make her homeless. I started with the kitchen. The cabinets? Emptied. The refrigerator? Unplugged and wheeled out. The oven? Disconnected. I unscrewed the faucets from the sinks. I uninstalled the dishwasher. Every cabinet door was removed and stacked neatly in the garage. By the time I was done, the kitchen looked like an unfinished construction project. Then I moved to the bathrooms. I took everything. The mirrors? Gone. The shower heads? Removed. The toilets? Unbolted from the floor. Yeah, you heard me right. I didn't just leave her without a home. I left her without a functioning toilet. And when I was done, I stacked all of her belongings into neat little piles in the living room, like I was returning her life to her piece by pathetic piece. Because this wasn't about chaos. It was about control. She needed to understand that she didn't lose everything. She had it taken from her. I wasn't done. I took every photo of us off the walls. I left the frames, but I shredded the pictures. I pulled our wedding album off the shelf, flipped through it one last time, then tossed it in the fireplace. I watched the pages curl, blacken, and turn to ash. By the time the fire burned out, our entire marriage had been reduced to dust. And, just for the final touch, I left a note on the kitchen counter. A single sheet of paper. I took my half. Enjoy yours. And then, I walked away. I didn't look back, because when Lauren walked through that door, she would realize she had already lost. While I was busy reclaiming my home, Beth and Tony were busy erasing Richard. And nothing hit that man harder than his precious Corvette. Richard worshipped that car. He washed it more often than he spent time with his wife. So when he came home, expecting to find it in his driveway, he found something else. Pieces. The Corvette wasn't stolen. It wasn't vandalized. It was dismantled. The seats? Stacked neatly beside the garage. The doors? Propped up like artwork. The engine? Disassembled and laid out piece by piece. It was a masterpiece of destruction. Beth had hired a team of mechanics, guys who worked fast, clean, and without leaving a trace. No fingerprints, no security footage, just the ruins of Richard's prized possession. And the best part? Beth made sure to schedule a news crew to drive by that morning. By noon, pictures of Richard standing in his driveway, gawking at his gutted Corvette, were all over social media. Local attorney finds his luxury car torn apart in bizarre act of revenge. The comments were brutal. Damn, bro. Who'd you piss off? That's what happens when you cheat. LOL. Hope your side piece was worth it, buddy. By the time Richard saw the news, his career was already in flames. Because Beth? She had already sent evidence of his workplace affairs to his firm's ethics board. Richard was finished. By the time Friday rolled around, everything was in place. Lauren, Richard, and Vanessa thought they were coming home to their comfortable lives. They had no idea that their lives had already been erased. Lauren had no home. Richard had no job. Vanessa had nowhere to go. And the best part? I had a front row seat to watch the meltdown. The house was quiet, empty, exactly how I wanted it. I had finished dismantling everything the night before, and now I sat in my car parked down the street, watching, waiting. Lauren's flight had landed 30 minutes ago. Richard's too. Vanessa would be arriving in an Uber, and none of them had any idea what was waiting for them. I checked my watch. 5:45 p.m. Right on time. Lauren's sleek black SUV pulled up in the driveway. She stepped out, rolling her suitcase behind her, her phone already in hand. She looked happy, relaxed, like a woman who had just spent a week in a 5-star hotel, getting fucked senseless by her boss and their secretary. I gritted my teeth, but I didn't let the anger consume me. Not yet, because I wanted to see it happen. I wanted to watch as her entire world crumbled around her. Lauren walked up the porch steps, typing something on her phone, probably messaging Richard or Vanessa about their little getaway. She reached the door, turned the handle. It didn't budge. I had changed the locks. For a moment, she frowned, confused. She tried again. Then she reached in her purse, pulling out her keys. I could see the moment her brain registered it. The key wouldn't fit. She stepped back, blinking, her expression shifting from confusion to unease. She rang the doorbell. Nothing. Then, she finally did the one thing I was waiting for. She turned her head, looked through the front window, and screamed. I almost laughed as I watched her reaction. She staggered back from the door, her phone clattering to the ground. From where I sat, I could see what she saw. A house that was nothing but an empty shell. No furniture. No appliances. No pictures on the walls. Nothing. Just neatly stacked piles of her belongings in the middle of the living room. A cold, silent reminder that she had lost everything. I watched her press her hands to her head, muttering to herself. Then she turned, frantic, grabbing her phone and dialing. I knew exactly who she was calling. Me. I let it ring. Her second call came in 10 seconds later. I let that one ring too. Then, finally, she did what I had been waiting for. She tried Richard. Lauren was still standing in the driveway when Richard pulled up. At first, he was grinning, probably expecting some fun little reunion. Then he saw her face. Then he saw the house. His eyes widened. His smile vanished. I wish I could have recorded it. The way his face drained of color as he realized something was very, very wrong. Lauren stormed over to him. "Ethan changed the locks," she shrieked. "He took everything." Richard barely heard her, because at that exact moment, he saw his Corvette, or rather, what was left of it. The pieces of his beloved sports car were still sitting in his driveway, a twisted, beautiful puzzle of expensive parts. His mouth fell open. What the fuck?" he choked out, stumbling toward it. Lauren kept shouting at him, but he wasn't even listening. He dropped his suitcase and ran to his car, hands shaking as he touched the bare frame. He looked like a man who had just found his family murdered. And then, his phone rang. He grabbed it. It was his boss, or rather, former boss. Because while Richard had been off fucking my wife, Beth had been torching his career. I had already heard the news through Beth's text messages. Richard had been fired. The firm was launching a full-blown investigation into his conduct. By Monday morning, the legal world would be buzzing with scandal. His reputation? Destroyed. His bank accounts? Locked. His career? Dead. Lauren was still screaming at him when Vanessa arrived. And that's when things got even better. Vanessa stepped out of her Uber looking annoyed, scrolling through her phone. Then she looked up. She saw Lauren, panic on her face. She saw Richard, frozen beside his dismantled Corvette. And then she saw her own husband, because Tony had arrived too. And Tony looked calm. Too calm. Vanessa frowned. "Tony." He tilted his head, his arms crossed. "Hey, Vanessa." She hesitated. I can explain." Tony smiled. "Good," he said, "because I'd love to hear it." Then he pulled out a manila envelope. Her divorce papers. Vanessa's face collapsed. I couldn't hear her response, but I could see her lips moving fast, her hands gesturing wildly. Tony just stood there, unmoving. Then, finally, he spoke again. "You should go inside." He nodded toward Lauren. "See what's left of your life." Vanessa spun toward the house. She walked up the steps, saw the door standing open, and peered inside. She froze. 1 second, 2 seconds, then she collapsed to her knees. That was the moment. That was the moment all three of them realized. They were ruined. I leaned back in my car, smirking. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Lauren was standing in the driveway, shaking. Richard was pacing back and forth, his hands in his hair, muttering to himself. Vanessa was still kneeling on the porch, silent, stunned. All three of them shattered. And I was just getting started. I pulled out my phone, opening my texts. Beth had already sent me one. "Beth, call me when you're done watching the fireworks." I grinned, tossing my phone onto the passenger seat. I had one. They had nothing left. And it was only going to get worse. For a long moment, none of them moved. Lauren stood in the middle of the driveway, her hands tangled in her hair, spinning in circles like she couldn't decide which catastrophe to deal with first. The empty house, the locked accounts, the dismantled Corvette, the furious exes. Richard had collapsed onto the curb, head in his hands, rocking slightly like a man teetering on the edge of a mental breakdown. Vanessa was still kneeling on the porch, staring into the house as if she expected the furniture to magically reappear. And Tony? Tony was smiling. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads, the slow, dawning horror as they realized their entire lives had been burned to the ground in a single night. And the best part? They had no idea who struck the match. Lauren was the first to snap out of it. She turned, grabbed her phone, and started furiously dialing. I already knew who she was calling. Me. I let it ring, then ring again. Then I watched as she turned to Richard, her face wild. "I can't get a hold of Ethan," she shrieked. "What the fuck is going on?" Richard didn't answer. He was too busy staring blankly at his phone screen. That's when she realized he wasn't calling anyone. He was checking his bank account. I already knew what he was seeing. Or rather, what he wasn't seeing. His accounts were frozen. His credit cards were declined. His emergency funds? Locked. Beth had cleaned him out. Lauren saw the look on his face. "Richard," he swallowed hard. I don't know what's happening." Lauren snatched her own phone, opening her banking app. And then, finally, it hit her too. She screamed, a raw, agonized sound that echoed down the street. Richard shot to his feet, pacing. Beth did this. No shit. Lauren spun toward him. You said she'd never. I didn't think she would. Richard barked. Jesus Christ. Lauren, I thought she'd leave me not. He gestured wildly at his wrecked life. Lauren's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since this entire thing started, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not guilt, not regret. Fear. Because she wasn't dealing with just an affair anymore. She was dealing with war. Meanwhile, Tony was handling his own business. Vanessa was still kneeling, her fingers digging into the porch as if she could somehow will the house back to normal. Tony crouched beside her. Calm, controlled, dangerous. Hey, babe, he murmured. Vanessa turned her tear-streaked face toward him, eyes desperate. Tony, He held up a finger. Shoo. She went silent immediately. Then he reached into his jacket, pulling out the divorce papers. Vanessa paled. This, Tony said, voice even, is your future. She shook her head. No, we can. Don't. Tony didn't even blink. Don't fucking insult me by pretending you care. Vanessa's hands trembled. But Tony, He leaned in. You're dead to me. Vanessa choked back a sob. Then he stood, tossing the papers at her feet. Sign them. And with that, he walked away. Lauren was still spiraling. Ethan, she gasped, grabbing her phone again. I need to, but before she could even try dialing, another car pulled up. A sleek black BMW. And out stepped Beth, dressed in a flawless navy pantsuit, heels clicking against the pavement. Beth exuded power. And when Richard saw her, I swear to God, he visibly shrank. Beth strode forward, her face unreadable, her movements slow and deliberate. She stopped right in front of her now destitute husband and looked him up and down like he was nothing. Then she spoke. You're done. Richard swallowed. Beth, please, She held up a single manicured hand, and he shut up instantly. Beth tilted her head. Do you remember what you said in that message, Richard? He blinked. What? Beth pulled out her phone, opened the text I'd sent her days ago. Then she read it aloud. Beth would never suspect a thing. She's too busy running her empire. Besides, even if she did find out, what's she gonna do? Divorce me? LMAO. Like she'd ever risk losing her perfect reputation. Silence. Richard's face turned white. Lauren and Vanessa stared at him, eyes wide. Then Beth smiled. Cold. Ruthless. You underestimated me, she said simply. Then she turned, walked back to her car, and drove away, leaving nothing but wreckage in her wake. I leaned back in my seat, satisfied. Lauren was ruined. Richard was destroyed. Vanessa had lost everything. And Tony and Beth, they were free. As for me, I pulled out my phone. Lauren had sent 16 messages. I scrolled through them, amused. Lauren, Ethan, please call me. Lauren, where are you? Lauren, what did you do? Lauren, I need to talk to you. Please, baby. I smirked. Then I typed a single reply. Me, I took my half. Enjoy yours. Then I blocked her number. Because I was done. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was finally free. Lauren didn't give up easily. I knew she wouldn't. The moment she realized she had nothing, no money, no home, no future, she did the one thing desperate people always do. She fought. And that's exactly what I wanted. Because the more she struggled, the more satisfying it would be when I crushed her. I knew she'd find a way to contact me eventually. I had blocked her number, ignored her emails, and walked away from the wreckage. But then, 1 week later, I got an email. Subject: urgent. We need to talk. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the attachment. It was a legal document. Lauren was suing me. For the house. I burst out laughing. She was homeless, bankrupt, and disgraced, and she actually thought she had a chance in hell of taking anything from me. Fine, Lauren. Let's do this your way. By the time we sat across from each other at the lawyer's office, Lauren looked different. The confidence was gone. The arrogance? Shattered. Her once perfect hair was a mess. Her eyes tired. Her expensive clothes replaced with something secondhand. She was falling apart. Good. I sat back in my chair, relaxed, as her lawyer began speaking. Mr. Carter, my client, is requesting primary ownership of the marital home. I smirked. The empty house. Lauren flinched. Her lawyer cleared his throat. Regardless of its condition, the property remains. I cut him off with a single piece of paper. Lauren's prenup. Signed, sealed, ironclad. She had waived all rights to my assets before we were married. Her lawyer's face fell. And then, just for fun, I leaned forward and delivered the final blow. I already sold the house. Lauren gasped. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. You're lying. I slid another document across the table. The bill of sale. Lauren's eyes flicked over it frantically. No, she whispered. You can't. I smiled. I had sold the house to my brother. For next to nothing. And once the dust settled, I was buying it back. Lauren had lost. Completely. Utterly. Forever. Her hands shook as she turned to her lawyer. Do something. But he was already closing his briefcase. There's nothing to do, he muttered. Because she hadn't just lost the house. She had lost everything. Lauren broke down in the parking lot. I didn't stay to watch. I had already won. Richard had disappeared. Fired. Broke. A joke. Vanessa had moved in with her sister. Divorced. Alone. Nothing. And Lauren? Lauren had nothing left. No house. No money. No career. Just the ashes of the life she destroyed. And me? I walked away. I had everything. My freedom. My future. My dignity. And best of all, I had the last laugh. The house was mine. Lauren was gone. Richard was ruined. Vanessa was history. By all accounts, the war was over. And yet, there was still one mystery left. Who the hell took apart Richard's Corvette? I had my suspicions, of course. Beth had handled the financial destruction. Tony had emptied Vanessa's house. But the Corvette? That had been surgical. Every piece neatly removed. Every part stacked like an artist's masterpiece. Richard had spent thousands trying to put it back together. I had watched him struggle, read the news reports, and laughed at every single headline. But even I had no idea who pulled it off. Until one night, when the truth fell into my lap. I had moved into my brother's house while I sorted my next steps. One evening, I was sitting in the garage, having a beer, watching my brother's drywall guy install some shelves. His name was Jake, early 40s, ex-military, built like a tank. He worked fast, efficient, no wasted movement. And then, out of nowhere, he said it. Man, lifting that Corvette onto blocks was the hardest part. I froze, the bottle halfway to my lips. I turned slowly. Jake didn't even look at me. He was still measuring. Excuse me? I asked. He smirked. You heard me. I stared. Jake chuckled. Then he leaned against the workbench, wiping his hands on a rag. Beth and Tony came to me, he said casually. Needed someone who could take apart a car fast, clean, no evidence. I blinked. So you, me, and a couple buddies. He shrugged. Did it in 3 hours flat. Didn't scratch a damn thing. Even drained the oil properly. I burst out laughing. Jake grinned. Richard was an asshole, he said simply. Beth paid well. I shook my head, still laughing. You guys are insane. Jake winked. Nah, we're just very good at what we do. It was perfect. Richard had spent his entire life believing he was untouchable. And yet, when the dust settled, he had been systematically dismantled. Just like his car. Stripped down. Left in pieces. And best of all, he never even saw it coming. The war was over. Lauren had lost everything. Richard's career was dead. Vanessa was a ghost. And me? I had won. Not just the battle. Not just the war. I had buried them. And now I was free. The war was over. And yet, everywhere I went, people still whispered about what had happened. Lauren's downfall. Richard's humiliation. Vanessa's destruction. It had become legendary. But there was one final moment left, one last nail in the coffin. Because winning wasn't enough. I wanted everyone to know. It happened at a bar a few weeks later. I was sitting with my brother and a few of his buddies, nursing a beer, when one of them, a guy named Greg, leaned in with a smirk. All right, man, he said. Be honest. Did you take apart Richard's Corvette? The table went quiet. Everyone was waiting. I let the moment stretch. Then, slowly, I smirked, took a sip of my beer, set it down, and without answering, I stood up and walked away. That was all it took. The rumors exploded. People swore I was the mastermind behind the entire thing. The house, the car, the career destruction. I never denied it. I never confirmed it. And that made it even better. Because now I wasn't just the guy who got cheated on. I was the guy who torched 3 lives and walked away smiling. A legend. And every time someone asks me about it, I just sip my beer, smirk, and let them wonder.